The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of my bedroom, casting delicate patterns on the antique oak furniture I had spent a lifetime collecting. At 78 years old, Eleanor Thompson had learned to appreciate these quiet moments before the house woke up. The faint scent of lavender from the sachets tucked in my drawers mingled with the aroma of coffee beginning to brew downstairs. My joints ached as they always did now, a dull reminder that time was stealing my mobility inch by inch, but my mind remained sharp, perhaps too sharp for the comfort of some. I could hear my son Robert moving about in the kitchen, the clinking of his coffee mug against the granite countertop a familiar morning ritual. Robert had moved back in 6 months ago with his wife Jessica and their 2 children after his business failed. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt crowded, filled with the constant noise of a family I barely recognized anymore. "Mother? Are you awake?" Robert's voice carried up the stairs, tentative as it often was these days, as if he were approaching a frightened animal rather than his own mother. "I've been awake for an hour, dear," I called back, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The cool wood beneath my feet sent a shiver up my spine. "Just gathering my thoughts before the day begins." I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate. When he appeared at my doorway, I was struck again by how much he had aged in the past year. The lines around his eyes had deepened, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. At 45, he looked closer to 60. "Jessica made pancakes," he said, avoiding my eyes as he often did when discussing his wife. "The children are excited because it's Saturday." "Tell them I'll be down in a few minutes," I replied, reaching for my housecoat. The soft cotton felt comforting against my skin. "Did you sleep well?" "As well as can be expected," he said, his gaze finally meeting mine. "Mother, we need to talk about something." The familiar knot formed in my stomach. "We need to talk" had become the prelude to difficult conversations lately, usually about money or my declining health, as Jessica called it. "Can it wait until after breakfast?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I suppose," he said, turning to leave. "Don't be too long. The pancakes will get cold." I watched him retreat down the hallway, his silhouette framed by the morning light. The house had been in my family for 3 generations, passed down from my grandmother to my mother and then to me. Now, with Robert's financial troubles, I wondered how much longer it would remain ours. Jessica had made no secret of her belief that we should sell it, move to something smaller, more manageable, for someone of my age. As I dressed, my fingers fumbled with the buttons on my blouse. These hands, once steady and capable, now betrayed me at the most inconvenient times. I remembered my late husband Charles, how he would tease me about my meticulous dressing, how I insisted on wearing stockings even on the hottest days because a lady never abandons her standards. Charles had been gone 5 years now, and sometimes the loneliness was so overwhelming it felt like a physical presence in the room. The sounds of the house grew louder as I made my way downstairs. The television was on in the living room, cartoons blaring. In the dining room, my grandchildren, 8-year-old Lily and 6-year-old Michael, were already seated at the table, their faces sticky with syrup. "Grandma!" Lily exclaimed, jumping up to hug me. Her small body pressed against mine, smelling of strawberry shampoo and something uniquely childlike. "Good morning, sweet pea," I said, kissing the top of her head. "You've got syrup in your hair." She giggled, touching the sticky spot. "Daddy said I could have extra today." "Of course he did," I replied, ruffling Michael's hair as I took my seat at the head of the table. He was quieter than his sister, more thoughtful, with Charles's eyes. Jessica stood at the stove, her back to me, flipping pancakes with an efficiency I had to admire despite my reservations about her. She was 38, 15 years younger than Robert, with the kind of polished beauty that seemed manufactured rather than natural. Everything about Jessica was calculated, from her highlighted blonde hair to her tastefully expensive clothes. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said without turning around. "There's fresh coffee." "Thank you, Jessica," I replied, pouring myself a cup. The bitterness of the coffee matched my mood. Robert sat opposite me, already halfway through his second pancake. He ate quickly, as if this were just another task to be completed before moving on to the next. "So what did you want to talk about?" I asked, cutting into my pancake with deliberate slowness. Robert and Jessica exchanged a look across the table. The children, sensing the tension, grew quiet. "It's about your driving, Mother," Robert said, setting down his fork. "Jessica and I are concerned." I felt my jaw tighten. "My driving is perfectly fine. I drove to the grocery store just yesterday." "That's not what Dr. Miller said," Jessica interjected, turning from the stove with a fresh stack of pancakes. She placed them on the table and finally looked at me directly. "He mentioned that you missed your last 2 appointments." "The first one I forgot about," I replied evenly. "The second, my car wouldn't start. Robert knows this. He helped me jump it." Even so, Jessica continued, taking the seat next to Robert, we think it might be time to consider other options. Maybe selling the car and using a ride service when you need to go somewhere. The subtext was clear, they wanted to isolate me, limit my independence. I had seen this pattern before with other elderly friends whose children had slowly taken control of their lives under the guise of concern. I've been driving for 62 years without a major accident, I said, my voice colder than I intended. I think I can manage a few more. Mother, please, Robert said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. We're just worried about your safety. And others. I pulled my hand away. If this is about the insurance premium increase, I can pay for it myself. My pension is more than adequate. It's not about money, Jessica said, though I knew it was always about money with her. It's about peace of mind. For all of us. The subtext was clear, they wanted to isolate me, limit my independence. I had seen this pattern before with other elderly friends whose children had slowly taken control of their lives under the guise of concern. Is that what you're doing? I asked, standing up so quickly my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Looking out for everyone's best interests? Or just your own? Mother! Robert exclaimed, rising too. That's not fair. Isn't it? I replied, my voice shaking with anger. You move back into my house with your family after your business fails. You don't pay rent. You eat my food. And now you want to take away my car, my independence, my life. Tell me, Robert, who exactly is benefiting from all this concern? The room fell silent, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the distant cartoon from the living room. Jessica's face had gone pale, her perfect composure cracked. Robert looked stricken, as if I had struck him. Grandma's mad, Michael whispered to his sister. I'm not mad, I said, my voice softer now. I'm just tired. I left the dining room without another word, retreating to the sanctuary of my study. The room smelled of old books and lemon polish, familiar scents that usually calmed me. Today, they did little to soothe the agitation coursing through my veins. From the desk drawer, I retrieved the key to my safe deposit box. The metal was cool against my palm. Inside that box were documents Jessica would love to get her hands on, the deed to the house, my will, and most importantly, the letter from Robert's first wife, Sarah, explaining why she had really left him all those years ago. Sarah had been my favorite daughter-in-law, sweet and kind, with a gentle spirit that Jessica lacked entirely. When she left Robert suddenly 7 years ago, everyone assumed it was because she couldn't handle the pressure of his business ambitions. But the letter she sent me afterward told a different story, one of emotional abuse, financial control, and a husband who saw his wife as just another asset to be managed. I had never shown the letter to Robert, partly to protect him, partly because I wasn't sure he would even recognize the man Sarah described. But watching him now, under Jessica's influence, I saw the same patterns emerging, the subtle manipulation, the slow erosion of independence, the framing of control as concern. The study door opened quietly. I turned, expecting to see Robert, but it was Jessica who stood in the doorway. May I come in? She asked, her voice softer than it had been at breakfast. It's your house too now, apparently, I replied, though I made no move to invite her further. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Eleanor, I know you're upset, she began, approaching the desk where I sat. But you have to understand, we're just trying to help. Help whom? I asked, meeting her gaze directly. Help me? Or help yourselves to this house and whatever money you think I have? Jessica flinched, but recovered quickly. That's not fair. We care about you. Do you? I asked, standing up. Or do you care about what I have? There's a difference, you know. For a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw the calculation beneath the concern. Robert is worried about you. He thinks you're becoming forgetful, confused. He thinks that because you've been telling him stories, I countered. The missed appointments, the confusion about bills, the incidents with the car. All carefully constructed to make him doubt me. That's not true, she said, but her eyes darted away from mine. We just want what's best for you. What's best for me is to be left alone in my own house, with my own things, making my own decisions, I said, my voice rising. What's best for you is to get me out of the way so you can sell this place and move on to your next victim. Jessica's face hardened. You're being paranoid. This is exactly what we're talking about. These delusions, these accusations. They're not delusions, I said, stepping closer to her. I see you, Jessica. I see exactly what you're doing. The tension between us was palpable, a living thing in the small space of the study. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, as if she realized I might be more formidable than she had anticipated. Robert and I have been discussing your situation, she said, recovering her composure. We think it might be time for more professional help. Someone to assess your cognitive function. You mean a psychiatrist, I stated, not asked. If that's what it takes, she replied. We have an appointment for you next week with Dr. Martinez. He specializes in geriatric mental health. The room spun slightly, and I reached out to steady myself against the desk. This was worse than I had thought. They weren't just trying to control me, they were trying to declare me incompetent. You can't do this, I whispered, the fight momentarily draining out of me. We can, she said, her voice cold now. And we will. It's for your own good. She left the room, leaving me standing there, the key to the safe deposit box still clutched in my hand. The morning sun had shifted, casting shadows across the floor. Outside, I could hear the children playing, their laughter a stark contrast to the darkness gathering in my heart. I needed to act, and quickly. Once they had a psychiatric evaluation, it would be their word against mine, and at 78, I knew how easily the system discounted the concerns of the elderly. From my desk, I called my attorney, a man who had been handling my family's legal matters for 30 years. Eleanor, he answered, his voice warm and familiar. How are you today? Not well, Thomas, I replied, keeping my voice low. I need your help. Robert and his wife are trying to have me declared incompetent. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you certain about this? They've made an appointment with a psychiatrist next week. Dr. Martinez. They're building a case, Thomas. Telling Robert I'm forgetful, confused. Trying to isolate me. Dr. Martinez, Thomas repeated thoughtfully. I know of him. He's reputable, which makes this more concerning. Have they mentioned power of attorney? Not yet, but I'm sure that's coming, I said, pacing the small space behind my desk. I need to protect myself. The house, my assets. The documents in your safe deposit box, Thomas said. Have you reviewed them recently? Not since Charles passed, I admitted. But I know what's there. The deed, the will, and other things. The letter from Sarah, Thomas said gently. Yes, I remember you mentioning it years ago. Do you think that's relevant now? More than ever, I replied. I need to get to it. And I need to update my will, make it clear that Robert has no control over my affairs unless I'm declared incompetent by multiple independent physicians, not just one they've chosen. I can draw up the papers, Thomas said. But you'll need to come to the office to sign them. Can you get away without them knowing? I'll find a way, I promised. Thomas, there's something else. I need you to look into Jessica's background. More thoroughly than before. There's something about her that doesn't add up. Her background check came back clean when you first asked me to look into her 3 years ago, Thomas reminded me. Then look deeper, I insisted. There's a calculation to her that goes beyond simple ambition. I want to know who she really is. I'll see what I can find, he said. In the meantime, be careful, Eleanor. Document everything. If they're trying to build a case against you, you need to build one back. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, the weight of the situation settling heavily upon me. The house, which had always been my fortress, now felt like a trap. Every room held potential enemies, every conversation might be reported back and twisted against me. From the window, I watched Jessica in the garden with the children. She was smiling, helping Lily with something in her small flower bed, the picture of a devoted stepmother. But I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting toward the house, as if expecting me to appear and challenge her performance. The day passed in a haze of tension. I stayed mostly in my study, coming out only when necessary. Each encounter with Robert or Jessica felt like walking through a minefield. They watched me constantly, asking seemingly innocent questions about my day, my memories, my health. Each question was a test, and I knew my answers were being evaluated, catalogued, and stored away for future use against me. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I found my bedroom door slightly ajar. I always closed it completely, a habit from years of living alone. Pushing it open, I noticed immediately that things had been moved. The photograph of Charles and me on our wedding day was angled differently. The book on my nightstand, which I had been reading, was closed with a bookmark in a different place. They had been searching my room. Looking for what, I wasn't sure. Money? Documents? Evidence of my incompetence? The violation sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I locked the door that night, something I had never needed to do in my own home. But even as I lay in bed, listening to the house settling around me, I knew locks wouldn't be enough to keep me safe. Jessica and Robert were determined, and they had the advantage of youth and the system's natural tendency to believe family members over the elderly themselves. The next morning, I woke with a plan. I told Robert the first needed to go to the bank to sort out some paperwork, a plausible enough excuse that he didn't question it. Jessica offered to drive me, but I insisted on going alone, citing the need for privacy when discussing financial matters. The car might not start, Robert reminded me, his concern sounding genuine but feeling like a trap. It started fine yesterday, I replied coolly. And if it doesn't, I'll call a taxi. The car started without issue, and I drove to the bank where my safe deposit box was kept. The drive gave me time to think, to plan my next moves. I needed allies, people who could attest to my mental competence. I needed to document everything that was happening. And I needed to understand Jessica's true motivations. At the bank, I was led to the vault where my box was kept. The metal door opened with a satisfying click, revealing the contents I hadn't looked at in years. There, nestled between old stock certificates and insurance policies, was the envelope containing Sarah's letter. I didn't open it there, simply added it to my purse along with copies of the deed and my current will. On my way out of the bank, I used my phone to photograph every document, sending the images to a secure email account Thomas had helped me set up years ago for just such emergencies. My next stop was the library, a place I hadn't visited in months but where I knew I could use a computer without anyone monitoring my activity. I spent 2 hours there, researching Jessica's background more thoroughly than I had before. Her online presence was carefully curated, showing a successful career in marketing, volunteer work, and a seemingly perfect life with Robert. But there were gaps, years where her employment history was vague, references to consulting work, with no specific clients mentioned. I printed out what I could find, noting the discrepancies and questions they raised. Then I emailed everything to Thomas with a request to dig deeper. On my way home, I stopped at the pharmacy to pick up a prescription. As I waited, I noticed a display of small recording devices. On impulse, I bought one, along with extra batteries. If they were going to document my every move and word, I would do the same. When I returned home, the atmosphere was immediately tense. Jessica was waiting in the foyer, her arms crossed over her chest. "You were gone a long time," she said, her voice tight. "The bank was busy," I replied, moving past her toward the stairs. "And I stopped at the library to return some books." "Robert was worried," she continued, following me. "He tried calling your cell phone several times." "I must have had it on silent," I said, not turning around. "I'm fine, as you can see." Upstairs, I locked myself in my study and immediately checked my phone. 6 missed calls from Robert, 3 from Jessica. They hadn't been worried, they had been tracking me, wondering where I was and what I might be doing without their supervision. That evening, I placed the small recording device in my pocket before dinner. The meal passed in strained silence, the children picking up on the tension and eating quietly. "Eleanor," Jessica said suddenly, setting down her fork. "Robert mentioned that you went to the library today. Did you happen to see Dr. Miller there? He said he might stop by after his shift." I felt a flash of anger. They were testing me, trying to catch me in a lie or a moment of confusion. "I didn't see him," I replied evenly. "But then, I wasn't looking for him. I was returning books," as I said. "Which books?" Jessica asked, her eyes fixed on mine. "Current bestsellers," I replied vaguely. "I don't recall the titles offhand." Robert looked at me with concern etched on his face. "Mother, you usually remember the books you're reading. You've always had such a good memory for details." The trap was set. If I couldn't name the books, it was evidence of declining memory. If I made up titles, they might check and find I was lying. "I returned several," I said calmly. "One was a mystery novel, the cover was blue. Another was non-fiction, about gardening. I'm afraid I don't remember the authors." Jessica exchanged a look with Robert. I could almost hear the silent communication between them. "See? She's becoming forgetful." Later that night, I transferred the recording to my computer, labeling it Dinner Conversation, October 14th. I also typed up detailed notes about the day's events, the questions they had asked, the way they had watched me. Thomas was right, I needed to document everything. The next few days followed a similar pattern. They watched me constantly, asked probing questions about my past, my memories, my daily routines. Each interaction felt like an evaluation, each response potentially used as evidence against me. I began to notice other things too. Small items moved in my room, questions about conversations I was certain I had never had. Once, Jessica mentioned discussing selling the house with me the previous week, a conversation that had never occurred. When I denied it, she looked at Robert with an "I told you so" expression. The appointment with Dr. Martinez was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Each day brought me closer to what felt like a trial, where I would be judged not by a jury of my peers but by a single doctor who had never met me before, based on the testimony of a son who seemed to have forgotten who his mother really was. On Sunday evening, Robert knocked on my study door. "Mother, can we talk?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the documents I had collected. "Of course, dear. Come in." He entered slowly, closing the door behind him. For a moment, he just stood there, as if gathering his thoughts. "I know you're upset about the appointment with Dr. Martinez," he began, taking the chair opposite my desk. But Jessica and I are really worried. You seem different lately. More suspicious, more angry. I have reason to be suspicious, I replied evenly. My own son and his wife are trying to have me declared incompetent. We're not trying to have you declared incompetent, he said, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. We just want to make sure you're getting the care you need. This house is too big for one person to manage. You're isolated here. I'm less isolated now than I've been in years, I countered. With you, Jessica, and the children here. But we're not always going to be here, he said quickly. Once I get back on my feet, we'll need to find our own place. And then where will you be? Alone in this big house, with your health declining. My health is fine, I interrupted. And even if it weren't, that doesn't give you the right to take control of my life. Mother, please, he said, reaching across the desk. This isn't about control. It's about concern. About making sure you're safe. I pulled my hand away. If you were concerned about my safety, you wouldn't be searching my room when I'm not here. You wouldn't be inventing conversations we never had. You wouldn't be trying to catch me in memory traps at dinner. Robert's face flushed. Jessica is just trying to understand what's happening with you. She's worried. Jessica is worried about losing access to this house and my money, I corrected. And she's using you to get what she wants. That's not fair, he said, standing up. Jessica loves me. She wants what's best for our family. Does she? I asked, standing too. Or does she want what's best for herself? Have you ever wondered why she married a man 15 years older than her? A man with a failing business and no assets of his own. The implication hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. That's enough, Robert said, his voice cold. The appointment is Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Jessica will drive you. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. He left the room, closing the door firmly behind him. I sank back into my chair, the fight momentarily draining out of me. The chasm between us had grown so wide I wondered if it could ever be bridged again. Monday passed in a blur of preparation. I spent most of the day in my study, organizing my documents and making notes. Thomas had emailed to say he was looking into Jessica's background more deeply and would have information for me soon. He also confirmed that the updated will was ready for me to sign. That evening, I received a call from an unexpected source. Eleanor? It's Margaret Chen. I was surprised to hear from my neighbor of 20 years. Margaret and I had never been close friends, more like friendly acquaintances who exchanged pleasantries over the fence and looked after each other's houses during vacations. Margaret, I replied, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. How are you? I'm well, but I'm calling about you, she said, her voice lowered. I hope you don't think I'm prying, but I couldn't help but notice some unusual activity at your house lately. My heart rate increased. What kind of activity? Well, for one thing, Jessica had a real estate agent here last week, Margaret said. A young woman from the agency downtown. They were measuring rooms and taking pictures. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Did you hear what they were saying? Not much, Margaret admitted. But Jessica did mention something about getting the house ready for market and maximizing the sale price. She seemed to be in quite a hurry. Thank you for telling me, Margaret, I said, my mind racing. I appreciate it. There's something else, she continued hesitantly. Yesterday, I saw her talking to a man in a suit in your driveway. They were looking at the house, and she pointed up at your bedroom window. When she saw me watching, she quickly ended the conversation and the man left. Did you recognize the man? I asked. No, but he looked official. Like a lawyer or something, Margaret said. Eleanor, I hope everything is all right. You know how neighborhood gossip can be, but this seemed unusual. Everything is fine, Margaret, I lied. But thank you for your concern. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, the implications of Margaret's call sinking in. Jessica wasn't just waiting for the psychiatric evaluation, she was already moving forward with plans to sell the house. The man in the suit was likely a real estate attorney, perhaps discussing how to proceed once I was declared incompetent. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house sounded like an intruder, every shadow seemed to hide a threat. At 3 a.m, I got up and packed a small bag with essentials, my documents, the recording device, extra batteries, and some cash. I placed it in the back of my closet, ready in case I needed to leave quickly. Tuesday morning arrived with a gray sky that matched my mood. I dressed carefully, choosing a conservative navy blue suit and simple pearls. Appearance mattered, and I needed to look like the competent, put-together woman I had always been, not the confused elderly person they were trying to portray. Jessica was waiting for me in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She was dressed professionally too, in a tailored beige dress and heels, as if she were the one with the important appointment. Ready? She asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. I've been ready for 78 years, I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee. I don't see why this morning should be any different. Robert came into the kitchen, his tie slightly crooked. Mother, please try to cooperate with Dr. Martinez. He's just trying to help. I'm sure he is, I said, setting down my cup. Shall we go? The drive to Dr. Martinez's office was silent except for the GPS directions issuing from Jessica's phone. I watched the familiar streets of the town where I had lived my entire life pass by, wondering how many more times I would see them. Dr. Martinez's office was located in a modern medical building downtown, all glass and steel, a stark contrast to the Victorian houses of the neighborhood where I lived. The waiting room was sterile and impersonal, with beige walls and generic landscape paintings. Eleanor Thompson, I told the receptionist, a young woman with bright pink hair and multiple facial piercings. She barely looked up from her computer. Please have a seat. Dr. Martinez will be with you shortly. Jessica sat beside me, flipping through a magazine with an intensity that suggested she wasn't really reading it. Robert paced the small waiting area, his anxiety palpable. Mr. Thompson, the receptionist called. Dr. Martinez would like to speak with you first. Robert looked surprised. Oh, all right. He disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with Jessica. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken accusations. You know, Jessica said suddenly, closing her magazine, this would be much easier if you would just cooperate. Cooperate with what? I asked evenly. With letting you take control of my life? With letting you sell my house out from under me? We're not selling your house, she replied, though her eyes darted away from mine. We're trying to ensure you get proper care. The only care I need is to be left alone in my own home, I countered. A home that my family has owned for 3 generations. A home that you seem awfully eager to sell. That's not true, she said, her voice rising slightly. Robert and I just want what's best for you. And what's best for you, Jessica? I asked. A quick sale so you can move on to your next scheme? Or are you planning to stay in the house after I'm conveniently tucked away in some facility? Her face hardened. You're being paranoid. This is exactly why we're here. Before I could respond, Robert returned, his expression troubled. Mother, Dr. Martinez is ready for you now. I stood up, straightening my jacket. I'm sure he is. As I walked down the hallway, I could feel Jessica's eyes on my back. The door to Dr. Martinez's office was open, and a man in his late 50s with silver hair and glasses stood to greet me. Mrs. Thompson, he said, extending his hand. I'm Dr. Martinez. Please, come in. His office was larger than I expected, with a window overlooking the street below. Bookshelves lined one wall, and diplomas from various universities were arranged neatly on the wall behind his desk. Can I get you something to drink? He asked. Water? Coffee? No, thank you, I replied, taking the chair opposite his desk. I assume you'd like to get started. Dr. Martinez sat down, studying me over his glasses. Before we begin, I want to assure you that this is a confidential conversation. Whatever we discuss here stays between us. That's reassuring, I said, though I didn't believe it for a moment. I assume my son and his wife have already given you their version of events. They've expressed some concerns about your memory and cognitive function, he acknowledged, opening a file on his desk. But I prefer to form my own opinions. How commendable, I replied, my voice dry. He looked up from the file, his expression neutral. Mrs. Thompson, I understand this might be uncomfortable for you. But my job is to assess your mental state and determine if you're capable of managing your own affairs. And if I'm not? I asked. What happens then? That would depend on the severity of the impairment, he said carefully. In some cases, family members are appointed as guardians or conservators. In others, arrangements are made for appropriate care. Appropriate care, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it these days? Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Thompson, why don't we start with some simple questions? Just to establish a baseline. I nodded, though my hands were clenched in my lap. What is today's date? He asked. October 17th, 2023, I replied promptly. Who is the current president? Joseph Biden, I answered. Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58, 51, 44, 37, 30, 23, 16, 9, 2, I recited without hesitation. He made a note on his pad. Very good. Now, can you tell me where you were born? St. Mary's Hospital, right here in town. May 5th, 1945, I replied. And your parents' names? William and Margaret Anderson, I said. My father was a pharmacist, and my mother was a teacher before she married. Tell me about your childhood, he suggested. I described growing up in the same town where I still lived, attending the local schools, meeting Charles at a church social when I was 19. I spoke of our marriage, the birth of Robert, Charles's death from a heart attack 5 years ago. Throughout my recitation, Dr. Martinez nodded occasionally, making notes. You seem to have excellent recall of distant events, he observed. What about more recent memories? Can you tell me what you had for breakfast this morning? Pancakes, I replied. Your daughter-in-law made them. The children were excited because it was Saturday. He looked up from his notes, his expression unchanged. Mrs. Thompson, today is Tuesday. I felt a moment of panic. Had I lost track of the days? But no, I was certain it was Tuesday. Robert had specifically mentioned the appointment was on Tuesday. Pancakes were on Saturday, I corrected myself. This morning, I had coffee and a piece of toast. I was too nervous to eat much. I see, he said, making another note. And what did you do yesterday? I spent most of the day in my study, organizing documents, I replied. In the afternoon, I went to the library to return some books. Which books? He asked, looking up sharply. I recognized the trap immediately, the same one Jessica had said at dinner. Several, I said vaguely. I don't recall all the titles offhand. Dr. Martinez made another note, and I could feel my chances slipping away. He was building a case, just as they had planned. Mrs. Thompson, he said, setting down his pen. Have you been feeling paranoid lately? As if people are watching you or plotting against you? I hesitated, knowing how my answer would be interpreted. I have reason to be concerned, I said carefully. My daughter-in-law has been overly interested in my affairs. In what way? He asked. She wants to sell my house, I replied. She's had real estate agents to the house when I wasn't there. She's searching my room, moving my things. Have you confronted her about this? He asked. I've tried, I said. But she and Robert have already made up their minds about me. Dr. Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying me. Mrs. Thompson, it's not uncommon for elderly individuals to become suspicious of family members, especially when those family members are trying to help. Sometimes, what feels like interference is actually concern. And sometimes, I countered, what feels like concern is actually greed. He made another note, and I could feel the interview drawing to a close. I had failed the test, and we both knew it. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice gentle now. Based on our conversation and the information provided by your son and daughter-in-law, I have some concerns about your ability to manage your affairs independently. I felt a cold dread wash over me. You're declaring me incompetent. I'm recommending a full cognitive evaluation, he corrected. And in the meantime, I think it would be best if someone were appointed to oversee your financial and medical decisions. Jessica, I suppose, I said bitterly. I believe your son mentioned that his wife has a background in business management, Dr. Martinez replied. She seems well qualified. Of course she does, I said, standing up. Is that all? For now, he said, also standing. I'll be preparing my report over the next few days. Your son should have it by the end of the week. I walked out of his office without another word, my mind racing. In the waiting room, Robert and Jessica stood up as I entered. Well? Robert asked, his expression anxious. Dr. Martinez will be sending you his report, I said, my voice flat. I believe you'll find it aligns with your expectations. Jessica's face showed a flicker of triumph, quickly masked. Mother, this is for the best. We want to help you. I'm sure you do, I replied, walking past them toward the exit. The drive home was even more silent than the drive to the doctor's office. I watched the town where I had spent my entire life pass by, wondering how much longer I would be able to call it home. When we arrived back at the house, I went directly to my study and locked the door behind me. From my desk drawer, I retrieved the envelope containing Sarah's letter. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, the paper yellowed with age. The letter was dated 7 years ago, just after Sarah had left Robert. I had read it dozens of times, but now, with the threat of losing everything hanging over me, the words took on new significance. Dear Eleanor, it began, in Sarah's neat, precise handwriting. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't try to find me. This is the hardest decision I've ever made, but I can't stay with Robert anymore. I know everyone thinks I left because I couldn't handle the pressure of his business ambitions, but that's not the truth. The truth is that Robert has changed. He's become controlling, manipulative. He sees me not as his wife but as an asset to be managed, just like his business. He's been hiding financial problems from me, Eleanor. Serious ones. The business isn't just struggling, it's failing. He's taken out loans against our house without telling me, forged my signature on documents. When I confronted him about it, he became angry, told me I didn't understand business, that I should trust him to handle things. But it's not just the finances. It's the small things, the daily erosion of my independence. He questions my decisions, my friendships, my spending. He's isolated me from my friends, made it difficult for me to see my family. He's chipping away at my confidence, making me doubt myself. The worst part is that he doesn't see it as abuse. He sees it as concern, as taking care of me. He tells me he's just trying to protect me, that I'm too emotional, too impulsive to make good decisions on my own. I'm leaving because I'm afraid of what will happen if I stay. I'm afraid I'll wake up one day and not recognize myself anymore, so beaten down by his concern that I've lost the ability to think for myself. Please don't hate him, Eleanor. I think he genuinely believes he's doing what's best. But his best is destroying me. I'll always love you, and I'll always be grateful for your kindness to me. You've been more of a mother to me than my own. With love, Sarah. I folded the letter carefully, my mind racing. The pattern Sarah described was the same one I was experiencing now with Jessica and Robert. The concern that was actually control, the isolation, the financial manipulation. From my pocket, I retrieved my phone and called Thomas. Eleanor, he answered. How did it go with Dr. Martinez? As expected, I replied. He's recommending that someone be appointed to oversee my affairs. I assume Jessica will be that someone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I was afraid of that. But I have some information that might help. I did some digging into Jessica's background, like you asked. And? I prompted. It's interesting, Thomas said. Her employment history is spottier than it appears on the surface. Those consulting years? She was working for a company called Senior Care Solutions. What kind of company? I asked. Exactly what it sounds like, Thomas replied. They provide services for elderly clients, including financial management, estate planning, and in some cases, guardianship services. I felt a chill run down my spine. Go on. The company has faced several lawsuits over the years, Thomas continued. Allegations of exploiting vulnerable elderly clients, pressuring them into signing over control of their assets. Nothing was ever proven in court, but there were enough complaints that the company changed its name 3 years ago. It's now called Golden Years Management. Jessica's current employer, I said, connecting the dots. Exactly, Thomas confirmed. And here's where it gets really interesting. Before she met Robert, Jessica was married to a man named Daniel Carter. He was 82 years old. I sank into my chair, the letter from Sarah still in my hand. What happened to him? He died 18 months after they married, Thomas said. Left everything to Jessica. His children contested the will, claiming undue influence, but they couldn't prove anything. Jessica had all the documentation showing that Daniel had willingly made changes to his estate plan after they married. Because she was working for a company that specialized in exactly that, I said, my voice cold. There's more, Thomas added. I found a connection between Jessica and Dr. Martinez. He serves as a consulting physician for Golden Years Management. He's referred several clients to their services over the years. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so ugly I could barely comprehend it. This wasn't just about my house or my money. This was a pattern, a carefully orchestrated scheme that Jessica had executed before, with Dr. Martinez as a willing accomplice. Thomas, I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. I need to get out of that house. Tonight. I agree, he replied. I've already made arrangements. There's a hotel across town, the Marriott by the airport. I've booked a suite under a different name. I can have someone there to meet you in an hour. I can't leave with Robert and Jessica here, I said. They'll stop me. Then create a diversion, Thomas suggested. Tell them you're not feeling well, that you need to lie down. Pack a small bag, leave it by the back door. I'll have someone there to pick it up. Once your things are out, you can leave more easily. It might work, I said, my mind already racing. But what about tomorrow? What about the house? Don't worry about the house right now, Thomas advised. Worry about yourself. I'll file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning to prevent them from taking any action based on Dr. Martinez's report. We'll also request a second opinion from an independent geriatric psychiatrist. And Jessica? I asked. We'll deal with Jessica, Thomas promised. I've already reached out to the children from Daniel Carter's first marriage. They might be willing to testify about their experience with her. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, the weight of what I had learned settling heavily upon me. Jessica wasn't just greedy, she was predatory. And Robert, whether knowingly or not, was her accomplice. I spent the next hour gathering the most important documents and items, packing them into a small overnight bag. The letter from Sarah, my copies of the deed and will, the recordings I had made, the notes I had taken. Each item represented a piece of the puzzle, evidence that might help me reclaim my life. As I worked, I could hear the sounds of the house around me, the television in the living room, Jessica moving about in the kitchen, the children playing in their room. These were the sounds of my home, but they no longer brought me comfort. Now, they sounded like the ticking of a clock, counting down the moments until I would be forced out. At 7 o'clock, I left my study and went downstairs. Robert was in the living room, watching the news, while Jessica was preparing dinner in the kitchen. "Robert," I said, my voice deliberately weak. "I'm not feeling well. I think I need to lie down." He turned off the television and stood up. "What's wrong? Should I call Dr. Miller?" "No," I replied, leaning against the doorframe for effect. "Just tired." The appointment with Dr. Martinez took more out of me than I expected. "Let me help you upstairs," he offered, coming toward me. "That's not necessary," I said, holding up a hand. "I just need to rest. Would you and Jessica mind eating without me tonight?" "Of course not," he said, his expression concerned. "Should we check on you later?" "I'd prefer to sleep," I replied. "I'll see you in the morning." As I climbed the stairs, I could feel Jessica's eyes on me from the kitchen doorway. I forced myself to move slowly, as if I were truly exhausted and unwell. In my bedroom, I waited until I heard the sounds of dinner being served downstairs. Then I quietly retrieved the bag I had packed and slipped out the back door. The October air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. In the darkness of the backyard, I felt a moment of fear, of uncertainty about what I was doing. But it passed quickly, replaced by determination. A car was waiting at the end of the driveway, its lights off. As I approached, the driver's side door opened, and a man in a dark suit emerged. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I replied. "I'm from Thomas's office," he said, taking my bag. "Let's get you to the hotel." The drive to the Marriott was silent. I watched the town I had always known pass by in darkness, wondering when I would see it again. The hotel was bright and impersonal, a stark contrast to the historic home I was leaving behind. The suite Thomas had booked was spacious and anonymous, with a view of the airport runway. Planes took off and landed in a steady rhythm, each one carrying people to destinations unknown. For the first time in my life, I felt like one of those people, displaced, uncertain, heading into an unknown future. The man from Thomas's office handed me a key card and an envelope. "Thomas said you should call him when you're settled. There's a prepaid phone in the envelope, along with some cash and a credit card in your name." "Thank you," I said, taking the envelope. "What's your name?" "David," he replied. "I'll be available if you need anything else tonight." After he left, I called Thomas from the prepaid phone. "You're safe?" he asked immediately. "I'm at the hotel," I confirmed. "Thomas, what happens now?" "Now we fight back," he replied. "I've filed the paperwork for an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. We'll request that a temporary guardian be appointed, someone neutral, not Jessica or Robert. We'll also present what we've learned about Jessica's background and her connection to Dr. Martinez." "And Robert?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "Robert is a more complicated situation," Thomas acknowledged. "At best, he's been manipulated. At worst, he's an active participant. We'll see how the hearing goes before deciding how to handle him." We talked for another 20 minutes, going over strategy and logistics. When we hung up, I felt a small measure of hope, but it was tempered by the reality of what I was facing. I was in a battle for my life, my independence, and my legacy. The next morning, I woke early, the planes taking off outside my window, a reminder that life was moving forward even as mine felt suspended. David arrived at 8 o'clock with coffee and a change of clothes. "The hearing is at 10, he said, handing me a paper bag. "Thomas thought you might want something more professional to wear." Inside was a simple but elegant navy blue pantsuit, similar to what I might have chosen for myself. I changed quickly, the unfamiliar fabric a reminder of how much my life had changed in just 24 hours. The courthouse was a grand old building with marble floors and high ceilings, a place I had visited only once before, for jury duty years ago. Thomas was waiting for me in a small conference room, his expression serious but not hopeless. "How are you holding up?" he asked as I entered. "As well as can be expected," I replied, taking a seat at the table. "Have you heard from Robert or Jessica?" "They've been trying to reach you," Thomas said. "Robert has called your cell phone a dozen times. Jessica called my office this morning, demanding to know where you were." "What did you tell her?" I asked. "That you were seeking legal counsel regarding your rights," Thomas replied. She didn't like that answer. A woman in her late 30s entered the room then, carrying a briefcase. She had dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and wore a tailored black suit. "Eleanor Thompson, I'm Janet Wu," she said, extending her hand. "I'm the geriatric psychiatrist Thomas retained for a second opinion." "Dr. Wu," I replied, shaking her hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Thomas explained the situation," she said, taking a seat. "I've reviewed the notes from your appointment with Dr. Martinez, as well as the documentation Thomas provided about your daughter-in-law's background." "And?" I prompted. "And there are some red flags," she replied. "The way Dr. Martinez conducted his evaluation, the leading nature of his questions, the fact that he met with your son and daughter-in-law before seeing you, all of this suggests a predetermined outcome. Can you help me? I asked directly. I believe I can, Dr. Wu replied. I've prepared a preliminary assessment based on our conversation and the materials Thomas provided. I'm prepared to testify that you show no signs of cognitive impairment that would justify guardianship. The relief I felt was so intense it almost brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. Thomas cleared his throat. We should go over what to expect in the hearing. The judge will hear arguments from both sides. Jessica and Robert will likely be there, possibly with their attorney. We'll present our case for appointing a neutral temporary guardian and for ordering a full, independent evaluation. And if the judge rules against us? I asked. We appeal, Thomas said simply. But I don't think it will come to that. The information we have about Jessica's background is compelling, especially when combined with Dr. Wu's assessment. The hearing was scheduled for courtroom 4B, a smaller room used for family matters. As we entered, I saw Robert and Jessica already seated at the opposite table with their attorney, a woman I recognized from town, someone who specialized in estate planning. Robert looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and a rumpled shirt. Jessica, by contrast, was perfectly composed, dressed in a cream-colored suit that made her look angelic and innocent. She glanced at me as I entered, her expression unreadable. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Miller entered the room. I recognized him from community events, a man in his late 60s with a reputation for fairness. The hearing proceeded as Thomas had outlined, with both sides presenting their arguments. Jessica's attorney painted a picture of a concerned family trying to help an elderly mother who was becoming increasingly paranoid and forgetful. My client, Mrs. Thompson, has accused her daughter-in-law of searching her room, moving her belongings, and plotting to sell her home out from under her, the attorney said. These are classic symptoms of paranoia, common in elderly individuals experiencing cognitive decline. Thomas countered with the information we had gathered about Jessica's background, her connection to Dr. Martinez, and the pattern of behavior suggested by her previous marriage. Your Honor, Thomas said, this isn't a case of an elderly woman experiencing paranoia. This is a case of a sophisticated predator who has executed this pattern before, with Dr. Martinez as a willing accomplice. Judge Miller listened to both sides with thoughtful attention, occasionally making notes. When it was time for testimony, I was called to the stand first. Mrs. Thompson, Judge Miller began, how long have you lived in your current home? My entire life, I replied. Except for the 4 years I was away at college. And you're familiar with your financial affairs? He asked. I manage them myself, I confirmed. I have since my husband passed away 5 years ago. Can you tell me about your relationship with your son and daughter-in-law? He asked. I took a deep breath. Robert moved back in 6 months ago after his business failed. At first, I was happy to have him and his family here. But things changed. Jessica began questioning my decisions, suggesting I was forgetful or confused. She started searching my room when I wasn't there. She had real estate agents to the house without my knowledge. Did you confront her about this? The judge asked. I tried, I replied. But she and Robert had already decided I was becoming incompetent. They made an appointment with Dr. Martinez without consulting me. And what happened at that appointment? He asked. I described the evaluation, the leading questions, the way Dr. Martinez had already formed an opinion before even meeting me. He asked me what I had for breakfast, I said. I told him pancakes, because that's what we had on Saturday. When he pointed out that it was Tuesday, I corrected myself. But I could see him making notes, using my momentary confusion as evidence against me. Was it a momentary confusion? The judge asked. No, I replied firmly. I knew it was Tuesday. I was simply describing the most recent breakfast I had with the family, which happened to be on Saturday. But he interpreted it as memory loss. Jessica's attorney cross-examined me next, trying to poke holes in my testimony, to portray me as confused and unreliable. Mrs. Thompson, she began, isn't it true that you've become more forgetful recently? That you've missed appointments, forgotten conversations? I missed one appointment, I corrected. And I didn't forget a conversation with Jessica about selling the house because that conversation never happened. Isn't it possible that you simply don't remember it? She asked. Isn't it possible, I countered, that Jessica is lying about having that conversation? The attorney frowned, clearly not expecting me to push back. Mrs. Thompson, do you trust your son? The question caught me off guard. I want to, I replied honestly. But I believe he's been influenced by Jessica. He's under a great deal of stress since his business failed. Failed because of poor financial decisions, the attorney suggested. Decisions perhaps influenced by his own cognitive issues, which might be hereditary. Objection, Thomas stood up. There's no evidence of cognitive issues in either Mrs. Thompson or her son. Sustained, Judge Miller ruled. Stick to the facts, counselor. Dr. Wu testified next, providing her professional opinion that I showed no signs of cognitive impairment that would justify guardianship. She was followed by Thomas, who presented the evidence we had gathered about Jessica's background. Your Honor, Thomas said, we have evidence that Mrs. Thompson's daughter-in-law worked for a company that has faced multiple lawsuits alleging exploitation of elderly clients. We have evidence that she married an elderly man who died 18 months later, leaving everything to her. We have evidence that Dr. Martinez, who conducted the evaluation of Mrs. Thompson, has professional ties to the same company. Jessica's attorney objected repeatedly, but Judge Miller allowed most of Thomas's testimony. When it was Jessica's turn to testify, she maintained her composure, portraying herself as a concerned family member trying to help. I love Robert, she said, tears welling in her eyes. And I've grown to love Eleanor too. It breaks my heart to see her struggling, to see her becoming paranoid and suspicious. We're not trying to take anything from her. We're trying to get her the help she needs. Then why did you have real estate agents at the house without Mrs. Thompson's knowledge? Thomas asked during cross-examination. I was just getting information, Jessica replied smoothly. Robert and I have discussed the possibility that Eleanor might be more comfortable in a smaller place, something easier to manage. I was simply exploring options. Without consulting her? Thomas pressed. We didn't want to upset her, Jessica said. We thought it would be better to have concrete options to discuss rather than abstract ideas. Robert testified last, and his discomfort was palpable. He seemed torn between loyalty to his wife and love for his mother. Mother has seemed more confused lately, he said, avoiding eye contact with me. More forgetful. Jessica and I are just worried about her. Did you know that Jessica had real estate agents at the house? Thomas asked. I might have heard something about it, Robert replied evasively. Did you know that Dr. Martinez has professional ties to Jessica's employer? Thomas continued. No, Robert said, his expression genuinely surprised. I had no idea. Did you know that Jessica's previous husband was 82 years old when they married? Thomas asked. Robert looked at Jessica, his expression confused. No. She told me he was closer to her age. The courtroom was silent for a moment as the implications of Robert's testimony sank in. Even Jessica seemed momentarily flustered, though she quickly recovered her composure. After closing arguments, Judge Miller retired to his chambers to consider his decision. We waited in the hallway, the tension so thick it felt like a physical presence. Robert approached me hesitantly. Mother, I didn't know. Didn't know what, Robert? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Didn't know that your wife has a history of marrying elderly men for their money? Or didn't know that she was manipulating you into betraying your own mother? That's not fair, he said, his voice breaking. She told me she was worried about you. That you needed help. And you believed her without question, I replied. Without once coming to me, without once asking if her concerns were valid. I'm sorry, he whispered, tears in his eyes. Mother, I'm so sorry. Before I could respond, the bailiff announced that the judge was ready to return to the courtroom. We all took our places, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was it, the decision that would determine the course of the rest of my life. Judge Miller entered the room, his expression serious. He looked at each of us in turn before speaking. This is a difficult case, he began. On one hand, we have a family expressing legitimate concerns about an elderly mother's cognitive function. On the other hand, we have evidence suggesting that these concerns may be part of a pattern of exploitation. He paused, studying the documents in front of him. The testimony of Dr. Wu, combined with Mrs. Thompson's clear and coherent responses to questioning, suggests that she does not currently require a guardian. However, the concerns raised by her son and daughter-in-law cannot be entirely dismissed. I felt my heart sink. Was he going to rule against me after all? Therefore, the judge continued, I am appointing a neutral temporary guardian, Mr. David Chen, to oversee Mrs. Thompson's affairs for the next 90 days. During this time, Mrs. Thompson will undergo a comprehensive cognitive evaluation by a panel of 3 independent geriatric psychiatrists, one of whom will be Dr. Wu. He looked directly at Jessica. Additionally, I'm ordering a full investigation into Mrs. Thompson's allegations regarding her daughter-in-law's background and motives. If these allegations prove true, there may be grounds for criminal charges. Jessica's face went pale, but she quickly recovered. Robert looked stunned, as if only now realizing the seriousness of the situation. As for the house, Judge Miller continued, it will remain in Mrs. Thompson's name, and no decisions regarding its sale or disposition will be made without the approval of either the court or the temporary guardian. He looked at me then, his expression softening slightly. Mrs. Thompson, I understand this has been difficult for you. The court will do everything in its power to protect your rights and your independence. He banged the gavel. This hearing is adjourned. As we left the courtroom, Jessica pulled Robert aside, her voice urgent but too low for me to hear. Thomas put a hand on my arm. It's a good outcome, Eleanor, he said. Better than we could have hoped for. I suppose, I replied, watching Jessica and Robert argue quietly in the corner. But what happens now? Where do I go? David has arranged for you to stay at the hotel for now, Thomas said. We'll figure out the next steps tomorrow. For today, just rest. You've been through enough. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of dislocation, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. The town square looked the same as it always had, with the statue of the town's founder in the center and the historic buildings surrounding it. But somehow, everything seemed different now, less familiar, more threatening. David was waiting with the car at the curb. As I approached, Robert broke away from Jessica and hurried toward me. Mother, wait, he said, his voice desperate. I need to talk to you. I stopped, turning to face him. What is it, Robert? I didn't know, he said, his eyes pleading. About Jessica's past, about Dr. Martinez. I swear I didn't know. But you knew she was searching my room, I replied. You knew she was having real estate agents to the house without my permission. You knew she was trying to have me declared incompetent. I thought she was worried about you, he said, tears streaming down his face now. She told me stories, things you supposedly said or did. She made it sound like you were really struggling. And you never once came to me to ask if these stories were true? I asked, my voice breaking with anger and hurt. You never once thought to talk to your own mother before agreeing to have her locked away? I'm sorry, he whispered. I was so stressed about the business failing, about not being able to provide for my family. Jessica seemed so capable, so sure of what needed to be done. I let her take control. Because it was easier than thinking for yourself, I concluded bitterly. Because it was easier to betray your mother than to stand up to your wife. I'll fix this, he promised. I'll talk to Jessica, I'll make things right. Some things can't be fixed, Robert, I said, turning to get into the car. Some betrayals are too deep to ever truly heal. As David drove me back to the hotel, I watched the town where I had spent my entire life disappear in the rearview mirror. I was leaving behind not just my house, but the life I had always known, the security, the familiarity, the assumption that family meant safety and protection. That evening, alone in the hotel room, I allowed myself to grieve for what I had lost. Not just the house, but the relationship with my son, the trust one had placed in family, the belief that the world was fundamentally a good place where people treated each other with decency and respect. The next morning, Thomas called with news. The investigation into Jessica's background has already turned up some interesting information, he said. It seems Daniel Carter's children are more than willing to testify about their experience with Jessica. They've been trying to build a case against her for years, but they lacked concrete evidence. What about Dr. Martinez? I asked. His connection to Golden Years Management is stronger than we initially thought, Thomas replied. He's not just a consulting physician, he's on their board of directors. He also has a financial stake in the company. So they were working together, I said, not surprised. It appears so, Thomas confirmed. And there's more. We found evidence that Jessica has been communicating with a real estate attorney about selling your house, specifically discussing how to proceed once you were declared incompetent. The cold anger I had felt before returned, stronger this time. What happens now? Now we press charges, Thomas said. Not just civil charges, but criminal ones. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud. The district attorney's office is interested in the case, especially given the pattern with Daniel Carter. And Robert? I asked, my voice softer. That's more complicated, Thomas acknowledged. At best, he was manipulated. At worst, he was an active participant. The DA is willing to offer him immunity in exchange for testimony against Jessica. I thought about Robert's tearful confession at the courthouse, his genuine shock at learning about Jessica's past. I think he was manipulated, I said slowly. Weak, perhaps, and easily influenced, but not malicious. Then we'll proceed with that assumption, Thomas said. For now, focus on yourself. The panel of psychiatrists will be conducting their evaluation over the next 2 weeks. Just be honest, be yourself, and let them see what I see, that you're a competent, intelligent woman who has been victimized by people she trusted. The evaluation process was grueling but fair. 3 different psychiatrists met with me separately, each conducting a comprehensive assessment of my cognitive function, my memory, my ability to manage my affairs. They asked detailed questions about my past, my daily routines, my financial decisions. They tested my recall, my problem-solving abilities, my judgment. Throughout it all, I was honest, about my moments of forgetfulness, which I acknowledged were normal for someone my age, about my anger and hurt over Robert's betrayal, about my fear and uncertainty about the future. I didn't try to present myself as perfect, I presented myself as human. 2 weeks after the hearing, Thomas called with the results. "The panel has reached a unanimous decision," he said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "They found no evidence of cognitive impairment that would justify guardianship. In their words, you show age-appropriate memory changes but no signs of dementia or diminished capacity." I felt a wave of relief so intense it left me weak. "Thank God," I whispered. "There's more," Thomas continued. "The DA has filed charges against Jessica and Dr. Martinez. The evidence we found, combined with Robert's testimony, is compelling. Jessica has been arrested, and Dr. Martinez is currently out on bail." "And Robert?" I asked. "He's cooperating with the investigation," Thomas replied. "He's also filed for divorce and moved out of the house. He's staying with his sister in the next town over." The news left me feeling strangely empty. I had won the battle, but the war had cost me dearly. My relationship with Robert might never recover, and the trust one had placed in family had been irrevocably broken. "What about the house?" I asked. "It's yours, Eleanor," Thomas confirmed. "David will continue as temporary guardian for another 30 days, just to ensure all the legal matters are settled. After that, you're free to manage your own affairs again." "Can I go home?" I asked, the question feeling both simple and incredibly complicated. "Whenever you're ready," Thomas replied. "David can arrange for security if you'd feel more comfortable. Or we can discuss other options, selling the house, finding a smaller place, perhaps even relocating to a different community where you can start fresh." The thought of starting fresh at 78 was both terrifying and strangely appealing. The house held so many memories, good and bad. Charles and I had raised our family there, celebrated holidays, endured losses. But now it also held the memory of betrayal, of the violation of my privacy and trust. "I need some time to think," I told Thomas. "Take all the time you need," he said gently. "The house will be there when you're ready." That evening, I sat by the window of my hotel room, watching the planes take off and land. Each one carried people to destinations unknown, people starting new chapters in their lives. For the first time in decades, I didn't know what my next chapter would look like. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Robert. "Mother," he said, his voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" "What is it, Robert?" I asked, my guard up. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "Properly this time. Not just because I got caught, but because I was wrong. So terribly wrong." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks," he said. "About Jessica, about the business, about us. I see now that I've been weak, that I've let other people make decisions for me because it was easier than making them myself." "Go on," I said, my voice still cold. "I filed for divorce today," he continued. "And I've been talking to Sarah." I felt a jolt of surprise. "Sarah? As in, your first wife Sarah?" "Yes," he confirmed. "She reached out after she heard what happened. We've been meeting for coffee, talking. She's forgiven me, I think. Or at least she's willing to try." I thought about Sarah's letter, about the pain and fear she had expressed. "And what do you want from her, Robert? A second chance to hurt her again?" "No," he said, his voice breaking. "A chance to be the man I should have been all along. A chance to make things right." "What about the children?" I asked, my voice softening slightly. "They're with Jessica's sister for now," he replied. "I'm hoping to get custody, but that will take time. In the meantime, I'm staying with Emily, getting counseling, trying to figure out who I am without Jessica telling me what to think and feel." We talked for another hour, the conversation moving haltingly through the minefield of our shared history. I didn't forgive him, not completely, but I acknowledged his efforts to change, his willingness to take responsibility for his actions. When we hung up, I felt a small measure of peace, the first I had felt in months. The road ahead would be difficult, for both of us, but perhaps not impossible. The next morning, I made a decision. "Thomas," I said when I called him. "I want to sell the house." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure, Eleanor? It's been in your family for generations." "I'm sure," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "It's time for a new chapter. A smaller house, perhaps in a different community where I can start fresh." "Whatever you want," Thomas said. "I'll start making arrangements." 3 months later, I sat in a small but charming cottage in a coastal town 200 miles from where I had spent my entire life. The house was perfect for one person, 2 bedrooms, a small garden, a view of the ocean from the front porch. The moving truck had just left, and boxes were stacked in every room, waiting to be unpacked. The sale of the old house had gone smoothly, the proceeds more than enough to purchase this new home outright and still have a comfortable nest egg for the future. Jessica and Dr. Martinez were both facing criminal charges, with trials scheduled for the fall. Robert was in counseling, rebuilding his relationship with Sarah, and working toward regaining custody of his children. I had seen Lily and Michael twice since moving, awkward but hopeful meetings at a park halfway between our new homes. They were confused and hurt, but children were resilient, and I hoped that with time, we could rebuild our relationship too. As I sat on my new front porch, watching the waves roll in, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The ocean air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. Behind me, the house waited to become a home, filled with new memories to replace the old ones. My cell phone rang, and I glanced at the caller ID. It was Robert. "Hello," I answered, my voice relaxed. "Mother," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "How's the new house?" "Unpacked enough to live in," I replied. "Still plenty of boxes to go through." "I was thinking," he said hesitantly. "Lily and Michael have fall break next month. I was wondering if they might be able to come visit? Spend a few days with you, see the new place." I thought about it for a moment, about the complications and challenges of rebuilding our relationship. But then I thought about Lily's smile, about Michael's thoughtful eyes, about the possibility of creating new memories that weren't tainted by betrayal. "I'd like that," I said slowly. "I'd like that very much." As we hung up, I looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon stretching before me. The past few months had been the most difficult of my life, a time of betrayal and loss, of fear and uncertainty. But they had also been a time of discovery, of my own strength, of my capacity for resilience, of the possibility of new beginnings. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, the future waited. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to meet it. The weeks leading up to Lily and Michael's visit passed in a blur of unpacking and settling into my new life by the sea. Each morning, I woke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, a rhythmic reminder that time moved forward, regardless of the past. The salt air seemed to cleanse not just my lungs but my spirit, carrying away the lingering bitterness that had clung to me like a shroud. My new home was a fraction of the size of the house where I had raised my family, but it felt more like mine than any place had in years. The previous owners had left behind a small but well-tended garden, which I immediately began to cultivate. My hands, though sometimes stiff with arthritis, found purpose in the soil, planting rosemary and lavender, tending to the established hydrangeas that bloomed in shades of blue and pink. The physical work grounded me, connecting me to the cycle of growth and renewal that I had almost lost during those dark months of betrayal. I had made a few acquaintances in town, mostly through the local book club and weekly farmers market. There was Margaret, a retired teacher with a wicked sense of humor who lived 2 doors down, Arthur, a widower who walked his golden retriever along the beach at the same time every morning, and Helen, who owned a small bookstore on Main Street and had an encyclopedic knowledge of local history. They knew nothing of my past, of the drama that had brought me to their quiet coastal town. To them, I was simply Eleanor, the elderly woman who had bought the old Miller cottage and was slowly transforming its neglected garden. The day before Lily and Michael were scheduled to arrive, I found myself pacing the small cottage, nervous in a way I hadn't been since the court hearing. What if the children were uncomfortable here? What if they resented me for leaving their childhood home? What if they blamed me for the breakup of their parents' marriage? These thoughts chased each other in circles until I forced myself to stop, to breathe deeply, to remember that these were children who loved their grandmother, regardless of the circumstances. I spent the afternoon baking their favorite cookies, chocolate chip for Lily, oatmeal raisin for Michael, filling the house with the warm, sweet scent that had always meant comfort and safety. Robert called that evening to confirm the details of their arrival. "Traffic shouldn't be too bad if we leave early," he said, his voice still carrying that tentative quality that had become familiar over our recent phone calls. "I was thinking we could take them to the beach after they settle in, if that's all right with you." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, arranging cookies on a plate. "I have their rooms ready. I hope they'll be comfortable." "Mother, they'll be thrilled," Robert said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. "They've missed you. I've missed you." The admission hung between us, fragile but genuine. "I've missed you too, Robert," I admitted softly. We talked for a few more minutes about practical matters, what they should bring, what food the children liked, before saying goodnight. After hanging up, I stood at the window, looking out at the moonlight reflecting on the ocean. The waves were gentler tonight, lapping at the shore rather than crashing against it. I hoped our reunion would be like that too, gentle, healing, washing away the remnants of hurt and misunderstanding. The next morning, I woke early and walked along the beach as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the air crisp with the promise of a warm day to come. I watched a group of seabirds diving for their breakfast, their movements synchronized and purposeful. Nature moved forward, adapted, survived. I hoped I could do the same. By 9 o'clock, the cottage was ready. The cookies were arranged on a plate, lemonade chilling in the refrigerator, extra blankets folded at the foot of each bed. I had even bought a small sandbox and bucket of toys, placing them just beyond the patio where I could watch the children play from my rocking chair on the porch. At 10:30, I heard the sound of a car approaching. My heart beat faster as I recognized Robert's familiar sedan pulling into the driveway. I stepped out onto the porch, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed down my apron. Robert emerged first, looking older than I remembered, with new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. But there was something different about him too, a softness, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. He met my gaze across the yard and offered a tentative smile. Then the back door opened, and Lily and Michael tumbled out, their faces alight with excitement. "Grandma!" Lily shouted, running toward me with her arms outstretched. I knelt to receive her hug, burying my face in her hair, which still smelled of strawberry shampoo despite everything that had changed. Michael approached more slowly, his expression thoughtful as always. When he reached me, he wrapped his arms around my neck and whispered, "I missed you, Grandma." Tears pricked at my eyes as I held my grandchildren, the reality of their presence more overwhelming than I had anticipated. These children, this connection, this was what I had fought for, what I had almost lost. Robert approached then, standing awkwardly a few feet away. "They were so excited about the trip," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "They've been counting the days." "I'm so glad you're here," I replied, releasing the children and standing up. "Come inside, everyone. I've made cookies." The afternoon passed in a pleasant blur of activity. After the initial tour of the cottage and garden, we walked down to the beach, the children running ahead with their newfound freedom. Robert and I followed more slowly, our footsteps sinking into the sand. "The ocean suits you," Robert said, looking at me sideways. "You seem peaceful here." "I am," I replied simply. "It's different from what I'm used to, but different isn't always bad." "No," he agreed quietly. "It isn't." We watched as Lily and Michael chased the waves, their laughter carrying on the breeze. For a moment, we stood in comfortable silence, the unspoken history between us softened by the presence of the children and the vastness of the ocean. "Sarah and I are talking about getting married again," Robert said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to look at him, surprised by this revelation. "Are you sure that's what you want, Robert? After everything that happened?" "I'm sure," he replied, meeting my eyes directly. "We've been talking a lot these past few months. About what went wrong, about my part in it. About how we've both changed. She's been patient with me. More patient than I deserve." "Patience isn't about what someone deserves," I said gently. "It's about what they need." Robert nodded, his throat working as he swallowed. "I've been going to counseling, like I told you. It's helped me understand things about myself that I never wanted to see before. How I've always let other people make decisions for me, first my father, then Jessica, then business partners. I never learned to trust my own judgment." "It's never too late to learn," I said, though I wondered if I truly believed it. "The children are adjusting," Robert continued, changing the subject slightly. "They miss their mother, of course, but they understand that she and I can't be together anymore. They're seeing Sarah on weekends, getting to know her again." "And how is that going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Better than I expected," Robert admitted. Lily was hesitant at first, but Michael took to her right away. They've been baking together, going to the park. Simple things, but important. I thought about Sarah's letter, about the pain and fear she had expressed all those years ago. "Sarah is a good person, Robert. She always was." "I know that now," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I just wish I'd known it then." Before I could respond, Lily came running up to us, her feet wet and sandy. "Grandma, Daddy, come see what Michael found." We followed her to where Michael was kneeling in the sand, carefully excavating something with his small hands. As we approached, I could see that he had uncovered a perfect sand dollar, white and unbroken against the dark sand. "Can we keep it?" Michael asked, looking up at me with his father's eyes. "Of course you can," I replied, kneeling beside him. "It's a treasure from the ocean. A welcome gift to your new vacation spot." Michael carefully lifted the sand dollar, his expression serious with concentration. "I'm going to put it on my nightstand," he declared. "So I can always remember our first day at Grandma's new house." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep inside me, healing a part of me that had been wounded by the betrayal. These children, with their capacity for love and forgiveness, were the bridge between my past and my future. That evening, after a dinner of homemade macaroni and cheese, the children's favorite, we sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Lily and Michael were tucked under blankets on the wicker sofa, their eyelids drooping as the day's activities caught up with them. Robert and I sat in rocking chairs nearby, mugs of tea warming our hands. "Thank you for this, Mother," Robert said quietly, gesturing to the peaceful scene around us. "For giving us this chance to reconnect." "You're my son, Robert," I replied simply. "You're their father. That's what family does, they give each other chances." "I don't deserve it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Perhaps not," I agreed gently. "But deserving has never been the point of love, has it?" Robert looked at me then, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm going to make things right, Mother. I promise." "Start by being a good father to your children," I advised. "The rest will follow in time." We sat in comfortable silence after that, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. The children had fallen asleep, their breathing soft and even in the cool evening air. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, deep and abiding. This was what I had been fighting for, not just my independence or my assets, but these moments of connection, these opportunities for healing and renewal. The next day passed in similar fashion, a morning walk on the beach, a picnic lunch, an afternoon of gardening with the children, helping by digging holes in places I hadn't intended to plant anything. Robert seemed more relaxed than I had seen him in years, laughing freely at the children's antics and even joining in their sandcastle building contest. That evening, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, why did you and Daddy and Mommy Jessica have a big fight?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. I sat on the edge of her bed, considering how to answer. "Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, Sweet Pea," I began carefully. "Was it about the house?" she persisted. "Mommy Jessica said you were being silly about the house." I took a deep breath, choosing my words with care. "Your father and stepmother thought I should move somewhere smaller, where I could be taken care of better. But I wasn't ready to leave my home yet." "Are you ready now?" Lily asked, her expression serious. I looked around the small bedroom, at the seashell mobile I had made to hang above her bed, at the stack of picture books on the nightstand. "Yes," I replied honestly. "I think I am." "Good," Lily said, satisfied with this answer. "I like your new house. And the beach is better than our old backyard." Michael, who had been listening quietly from his bed across the room, spoke up then. "Is Mommy Jessica coming to visit too?" I exchanged a look with Robert, who had appeared in the doorway. "No, Michael," I said gently. "Your stepmother won't be visiting here." "Is she mad at you?" Michael asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's complicated," Robert said, coming into the room and sitting on Michael's bed. "Sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people, even when they don't mean to. Your stepmother made some choices that hurt Grandma, and now she has to face the consequences of those choices." "Like when I broke Grandma's vase and had to go to my room?" Lily asked. "Something like that," Robert acknowledged with a small smile. "But on a much bigger scale." The children seemed to accept this explanation, their questions satisfied for the moment. As I kissed them goodnight and left the room, I felt grateful for their resilience, for their ability to accept and move forward in a way that adults often cannot. The next morning, Robert and the children left after a leisurely breakfast. The house felt suddenly quiet and empty after their departure, the silence echoing with the laughter and conversation that had filled it for the past 2 days. I stood at the window, watching until their car disappeared down the road, a mixture of sadness and contentment settling over me. The phone rang an hour later, and I was surprised to hear Thomas's voice on the other end. "Eleanor, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," he began. "Not at all, Thomas," I replied, settling into my favorite rocking chair on the porch. "Is everything all right?" "Better than all right," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I wanted to let you know that Jessica accepted a plea bargain this morning. She'll be pleading guilty to charges of financial exploitation of the elderly and conspiracy to commit fraud." I felt a surge of relief so intense it left me breathless. "What does that mean, exactly?" "She'll be serving 3 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months, Thomas explained. "She's also been ordered to pay restitution to the Carter family and to complete 500 hours of community service upon her release." "And Dr. Martinez?" I asked. "He's still fighting the charges," Thomas replied. "But without Jessica's testimony, his case is significantly weakened. The DA is confident he'll accept a plea deal as well, especially now that the medical board has suspended his license pending investigation." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of this news settle over me. Justice, or something close to it, was being served. The people who had tried to destroy me would face consequences for their actions. "Thank you for letting me know, Thomas," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That's not all," he continued. "Robert called me yesterday. He wanted to discuss setting up a trust for the children, using some of the proceeds from the sale of the house. He specifically requested that you be named as trustee, with Sarah as successor trustee should anything happen to you." I felt tears welling in my eyes, touched by this gesture of trust and reconciliation. "Robert didn't mention this to me," I said. "I think he wanted to get everything in order before telling you," Thomas explained. "He's trying, Eleanor. He's really trying to make things right." "I know," I whispered. "I see that now." After hanging up, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the waves roll in and out. The ocean, with its rhythmic constancy, had become a metaphor for my life over these past few months, sometimes turbulent and stormy, sometimes calm and peaceful, but always moving forward, always changing. The following months brought a gradual settling into this new life. Robert and Sarah did remarry in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with only the children and me as witnesses. Sarah looked happy, her face softer than I remembered it, the lines of worry and fear smoothed away by time and forgiveness. Robert looked more relaxed than I had seen him in years, his shoulders no longer carrying the weight of secrets and deception. They bought a small house in a town halfway between my new home and Sarah's apartment, making it possible for the children to spend alternate weekends with each of us. These visits became the rhythm of my new life, anticipation building during the weeks apart, joy overflowing during their time together, gentle melancholy settling in after their departure. In between these visits, I built a life of my own. I joined the local historical society, contributing my knowledge of regional architecture to their preservation projects. I took a watercolor class at the community center, discovering a talent I hadn't known I possessed. I made friends, real friends, this time, people who knew me as Eleanor the artist, Eleanor the gardener, Eleanor the baker of excellent chocolate chip cookies, not just Eleanor the wealthy widow or Eleanor the victim of her son's betrayal. The legal proceedings against Dr. Martinez concluded with his acceptance of a plea bargain, loss of medical license, probation, and a substantial fine. I received a letter from him, in which he expressed remorse for his actions, though I couldn't bring myself to read it beyond the first few sentences. Some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. On the one-year anniversary of my move to the coast, I hosted a small gathering at my cottage. Robert and Sarah were there, with Lily and Michael, who now ran to my door as if they owned the place themselves. Margaret from down the street brought her famous lemon bars. Arthur arrived with a bouquet of beach roses. Helen contributed a bottle of wine that we all agreed was too good for the occasion. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I looked around my small garden, at the faces of the people who had become my new community, my new family. Robert approached, putting his arm around my shoulders. "Are you happy here, Mother?" he asked, his voice soft. I thought about his question, really considered it. Was I happy? Not in the simple, uncomplicated way I had been happy in my earlier life, before betrayal had touched me. But there was a deeper contentment now, a peace that came from having survived the worst and found myself still standing, still capable of love and trust. "I am," I replied, leaning into his embrace. "I really am." The children ran past then, chasing fireflies in the twilight, their laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. Sarah joined us, taking Robert's hand, and we stood together as a family, not the family I had expected, not the family I had once had, but a family nonetheless, rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal and misunderstanding. As darkness fell and the stars appeared one by one, I felt a sense of completeness, of rightness. The pain of the past year had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed, becoming part of the tapestry of my life rather than a wound that defined me. I had learned that family was not just about blood or obligation, but about choice, the choice to forgive, to rebuild, to love despite the risk of hurt. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, waves rolling in and out, a reminder that life moved forward, that time healed even the deepest wounds. I had lost a house, but I had found a home. I had lost a son, but I had found a man struggling to become worthy of the name. I had lost my innocence, but I had found my strength. And as I stood there, surrounded by the people I loved, under a sky full of stars, I knew that this was not just an ending, but a beginning, the beginning of a new chapter, written not by others who sought to control me, but by myself, with all the wisdom and resilience that 78